Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sabrina Kofer, and on behalf of Choice and ACRL, I'd like to welcome you to today's program. From the Great Resignation to the Great Reset, Libraries Preparing Academics for What's Next in the Job Market, which is sponsored by ProQuest, part of Clarivate. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from Choice and ACRL that addresses new ideas and developments of interest to the academic library community. Before we get started, I'd like to point out just a few features of the webinar software. All of the attendees who join the presentation are automatically muted and your cameras are off, so don't worry about generating any noise or feedback. We've got that taken care of for you. In the main area of the screen, you can follow along with the presentation materials. We are using the Q&A feature today. Please use it to ask questions of our speakers. We'll answer as many questions as we have time for at the end of the presentation, so please do type your questions into the Q&A module as they occur to you. You can also use the upvote feature to highlight questions that you like. Also note that there is closed captioning available for today's session. To toggle the automated captions on or off, please use the CC button on the bottom right corner of your screen. Last, please note that we are recording today's program and everyone who registered should receive a follow-up email with a link to the archive version. And with that, we are ready to get started. So I will pass it over to Peg Knight.
All right, thank you. Quick sound check, Sabrina, sound good?
Yep, sounds great.
Love it. Okay, great, got me. So first of all, welcome to everyone here today. It's really exciting to see so many live participants and even more registered. So we're reaching a nice audience. I'm thrilled that there's a lot of interest in this topic. And thank you to our panelists for joining us today. There'll be more thank yous, but I'll start with that. I just want to welcome everyone and thank them for joining us. We're going to take a look today at the Great Resignation and its kind of aftermath, although it still is kind of going. We're literally kind of pivoting into the Great Reset, or I've heard it referred to as a Great Reshuffle. We want to look at this topic specifically with an eye for the role that academic librarians are playing in preparing students for what is next out there. And I do want to just reiterate, this webinar is brought to you by ProQuest, which is a part of Clarivate, but we really wouldn't be here today if it weren't for our longtime partnership with O'Reilly Media. We've been partners at ProQuest with O'Reilly for going on 20 years now. It's a strong partnership. It's a partnership I really appreciate. And I just had to take a minute to kind of acknowledge that. So before we dig in, I did want to give our panelists, invite them to introduce themselves, give them a moment to tell you who they are and where they're coming from. And Hans, would you like to kick us off?
Certainly. This is Hans Byrel. I'm at Moraine Park Technical College. I'm the Library Services Coordinator. So part of my job is connecting our faculty and students with various research tools. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Hans. And Adrienne?
Hi, I'm Adrienne Graham. I'm the e-resources librarian for Austin Community College in Austin, Texas. And I've been the e-resources librarian now for almost over a decade, which still kind of surprises me. A lot of the work I do involves big picture online collection development. And I work with finding usage statistics, hosting regular trials, a lot of involved techie stuff. But ultimately, what I'm trying to do is make everything as transparent to our students and our faculty and connect them with the breadth of our online collection.
Awesome. Thank you. And last but not least, David.
Okay. I'm Dave Rockland with North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University. I'm the STEM librarian, and I do a lot of instruction for graduate and undergraduate students, as well as working with faculty to help them secure and share their research data.
Excellent. And I am Peg Knight. I'm going to facilitate the panel today. I'm a senior product manager with ProQuest, a part of Clarivate, and I work in our books business unit, where my role is in the partners and distributors space, which means I deal directly, very closely with O'Reilly all the time. And again, that's one of my favorite parts of the job. So as the slide says here, O'Reilly focuses on bringing together, part of their ethos is bringing together content and experts. That's what they've been about for more than 40 years. In technology and business in particular. And really, this is the fuel that helps them, as they say, spread the knowledge of innovators. So that is one of their taglines, spreading the knowledge of innovators. So that's what they're all about. And it happens by virtue of bringing together content and experts. And interestingly, I was thinking about this in our own way via this webinar. We want to do the same thing. We want to bring together content and experts to kind of fuel your innovation and help, give you some nuggets to take away back to your regular work lives and share ideas and spread this innovation. And this is where I just want to take a minute to thank Noelle. Noelle's on the call here too. She's really been pivotal in putting together this panel, and she recruited all these wonderful panelists, helped collaborate on all of this that we're doing today. So thanks so much to Noelle for her hard work and her great work on this webinar. So just a couple of thoughts to kick off the conversation here today. We've heard this phrase, the Great Resignation, quite a lot in the media over the last year or two even. Interestingly, according to a February 2022 article by a writer named Ann Kellett, it was a Texas A&M professor named Anthony Klotz who coined the phrase, right? The Great Resignation. And he did this in the process of predicting the sea change that we're seeing right now in the job market. So we're going to cover that concept of a Great Resignation, what it means for us. But I also want to kind of highlight what's down at the bottom of the screen here for you. The essence of it is where we used to see a very supply and demand kind of conversation around jobs, and that kind of put the power in the hands of the companies hiring employees, thinking of them as assets, this kind of thing. All of this volatility, all of this change is creating a situation where employees have a little more power than they have in the past. And that's really changed our worlds and our market in a very interesting way. And so we'll dabble in some of that today. And we're going to talk a little bit more about some statistics from the book reference there by Popelka. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. So you can see the book that I'm referring to here in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. You can see it's called Experience Inc. I just want to call that to your attention. It's actually a book that's in the O'Reilly for Higher Education resource. It's published by Wiley. It was a 2022 title, and it's one of about 46,000 ebooks in O'Reilly. They have many more different kinds of learning elements in O'Reilly books, videos, and so on, but it's one of 46,000 ebooks in the resource. I just want to share a few key statistics from that title that I think will kind of help us frame some of our discussion today. In these three themes, first though, I want to hover on that top point that the pace of change is accelerating, and it's critical to move with that. That's very much an O'Reilly message too. And so what they try to kind of convey to people is that that's what they're all about. They're all about helping people stay ahead of that really fast accelerating change in technology and business. So the idea is, since we're reskilling constantly, since the current skills we're using are getting outmoded very quickly, we constantly need to re-up and adapt. And that, they try to put together a resource that helps people do that. So first, just kind of focusing on the competitive landscape, as you see. That first quote interests me for sure. It's a quote from the book that is highlighted here. It happens to be from the chief economist at ZipRecruiter. Definitely someone who would have a sense of these things, of what's going on in the job market, and as an economist especially. What we're seeing, as you can see there, is there's this 50% increase in job openings that gives job seekers, again, more power, more leverage. But what they have is leverage in the middle of all this volatility. So what does that mean? That's what we'll try to unpack in part today. Okay, and the next theme we're going to cover is how to prepare these aspiring tech workers for the future. This is a quote from the book as well from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, pointing out that there's this growing disconnect between how we're preparing students, the education and labor markets, and the coding jobs. There's this glut of, or too many coding jobs and not enough people to do them. We've heard of this in other aspects of technology too. We all know there's huge demand for cybersecurity workers and other technical roles. But here you have it from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. 1 million more coding jobs in America than there are workers to fill them. That's pretty profound. And last but not least, thinking about people who are kind of seemingly far away from launching into a professional life, right? Students in primary schools, but you know, it happens sooner than it happens in the blink of an eye. Speaking as a person who's watching it unfold right before me. These students in elementary school are going to be doing jobs that don't exist yet. And so this quote kind of speaks to the situation where we're really going to have a challenging time preparing them for jobs that don't exist yet and putting us in a place where we're kind of behind even where we might have been in 1890 to prepare workers for the future. So some interesting dynamics. The volatility is definitely echoing through those comments. So Noelle, do you want to take us forward? Awesome, thank you. So that leads us to the discussion we're going to have today. So we want to pivot to our panelists, talk with them about these themes and explore what these library professionals are doing and what they're seeing on their campuses as they prepare students to launch right into their professional lives in a pretty volatile time. So thank you for that. What I want to have you do, first, Hans and David and Adrian, is tell us a little bit more about your campus or your region. We've got Hans coming from Wisconsin, we've got Adrian in Austin, Texas, and we've got David in North Carolina from very different kinds of institutions. So paint a picture for us. Where are you coming from? And we'll start with you, Hans. Again, we'll just kind of repeat that order and then we'll fly right into the broader questions.
Sounds good. So you'll find Moraine Park Technical College roughly between Milwaukee and Green Bay. We are mostly small cities, still agricultural in many aspects, and a large concentration of correctional institutions in our area as well. So our largest programs are in business and IT, manufacturing, continuing education for employers. And we've been doing outreach educational efforts for students who are incarcerated since the 1970s. So we've got a strong background in that. We started up in 1912, so we got a long history here in Wisconsin of technical education and a good collection of our history to look back on at the many changes. Personally, I would just want to share, I started here in 2008. I had quit my previous position at a public library, went into web design, and became a student at Moraine Park before working here. So I've got the connection of the experience with our curriculum, then seen how offerings have changed since then. So it's been exciting times lately.
I would imagine. Thank you so much. And Adrian, do you want to jump in with your picture of where you're coming from?
Yeah, happy to. So Austin Community College is in Austin, Texas. Texas is a big place, but when you think about it, kind of the iron triangle of Dallas in the north, Austin to the west, and Houston to the east. We're pretty big. We were founded in 1973. Our service district is pretty huge. We have around 7,000 square miles. If you count everyone taking a class, our enrollment usually hovers north of 70,000 students, and our FTE is usually bouncing between, depending on the year, 18,000 to 22,000. We also have 5,500 dual credit students. Those are students who are high school students who are taking college prep classes with us. And we have over 100 areas of study. So Austin Community College's growth has really mirrored Texas's growth and Austin's growth in particular. Something that made us kind of start looking at O'Reilly was that we brought on 3 4-year degree programs recently. We started with an RN to BSN, and then a software development degree, and then a manufacturing engineering technology degree. And those are the last 2 that got us looking at O'Reilly for higher education, as well as all of the growth that we see in Austin.
Nice. Really great intros. Thank you so much to Hans and Adrian. What about you, Dave? How about you in North Carolina?
So I am at North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University. Most people just know it as A&T. We are an 1891 Morrill Act land grant school established for the Black community in North Carolina. We are the largest HBCU in the country. Our enrollment this year topped 13,000 students. And this is in a town with another branch of the University of North Carolina system already in it, although they started a year after us. So We were the first. We are the nation's largest producer of African-American STEM graduates. So we have a lot of first-generation college students, a lot of legacy students whose parents were also Aggies. And the bulk of our focus is in, while it is a sort of comprehensive four-year university with the College of Arts and Sciences and other things, our largest colleges are the College of Science and Technology, Engineering, and Agriculture. And so we run everything from a North Carolina extension service and an experimental farm, all the way to a brand new bleeding edge engineering facility, where they're working on state-of-the-art projects, self-driving cars, drone swarm for gathering GIS information. It covers a pretty broad spectrum from old to new and the latest technology in every area.
Wow. That is kind of an amazing mix of institutions and contexts. I just think it's really helpful for people to understand your context when they're hearing your comments. So thank you for painting the picture of where you're coming from. So we'll dive right into the questions, kind of focusing first on that competitive landscape topic. So curious to know what you're hearing from faculty on your campuses on the importance of having resources there on campus that support efforts to prepare students for employment after graduation. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd
jump
be happy to speak to that, if that's
Please.
all right. So one of the things that we heard more and more from our faculty before the pandemic, then especially during the pandemic, was that, especially at Austin Community College, being a large commuter school, we don't have dorms. We have most of our students who have other commitments, either to family and to work. So having online subscriptions, having digital collections are especially important. And before the pandemic started, I would say we were probably hovering around, and if we're talking about monographs, we'd probably be 3/4 print, it seemed like, to about a third of it digital.
Yeah.
Well, when the pandemic struck, it's flipped. So now we have much more digital access than we did. We were already pretty heavy going that way. But when our library shut down and we needed access to materials, that was when we went all in. And what was really interesting for us regarding O'Reilly is that we actually had just done a 30-day trial in fall of 2019. So it's kind of fresh on our radar.
Yeah.
And and we had a lot of faculty feedback. We had fans. It's just that the price point was high, as we know, but good content. So we kind of set that away, thinking about how we would acquire it, and then shutdown struck. My dean, who was very vocal about, we need to pivot, we need to make sure and find resources to support things, found the money for O'Reilly. And so we brought O'Reilly on in June 2020. And since then, we've heard excellent feedback from our faculty in terms of our access and the ability for their students to prepare, especially in Austin, especially in a lot of places. We need to have that sort of access because they're going all sorts of places. And there are all sorts of tech companies that are looking for them to build those skills on their time. And it provides that for us.
Wonderful. Wow. I really love hearing that story and kind of hearing the context around, how you made this decision in light of the pandemic, but the timing couldn't have been better. Over the past several decades, right, witnessed lots of transitions from print to digital and different media that have come and gone along the way during my career. But yeah, definitely in my experience, saw the pandemic really make big changes for people's buying habits and priorities in terms of print and digital. So really, really helpful. David, did you have something you wanted to share on this one too?
I did actually. We actually came to O'Reilly just very recently, and kind of completely the other way around, actually. We got a large infusion of one-time purchase funds to buy contracts for library resources. Those one-time purchase funds amounted to around twice our annual acquisitions budget. So we had a lot of funds to play with. And one of the things that our acquisitions folks determined was something we ought to have was O'Reilly, and we heard about it in an all hands meeting. And I started looking into the platform and realized pretty quickly that it would address a lot of the concerns that I've heard from faculty, primarily during the pandemic. And one of the biggest things in the intro slide, they mentioned more coding jobs. One of the biggest things that I've heard from faculty in the departments that I liaise with, biology in particular, but also physics and mathematics, is that there isn't enough curated instruction for their students, both undergraduates and graduates, in things like machine learning using Python. And I'm interested in Python, so I actually logged in and looked at Python and found courses and books and just this amazing source of resources. And I said, man, I've had a lot of faculty members tell me that they wish there was something like that for their students, and now there is. So pretty excited about that. Particularly the area that we're in, Greensboro right now, is an area of massive tech growth. There is a battery plant coming just south of here, a couple of counties over. There's a Vietnamese electric car manufacturer that's building a plant. There's another automotive plant being built nearby. Honda Jet is here. The supersonic jet company Boom is building a facility here. And I think that's things like that are one of the functions of the competitive leverage that job seekers have. They are now really forcing employers to go to where the talent pool is and bring the jobs to where those people are, rather than having a giant headquarters somewhere and having people who have the technical talent have to move there. But I think there are also more skills that they're going to want. And a lot of them, I think our students can get at their own pace from some of the things in O'Reilly.
Really great points too. I think, gosh, I wanted to jump in and just say something about every one of your comments, but I don't want to take up too much time personally. Hans, did you have anything to share on this? The idea of like, what are you hearing from faculty on campus as they aim to prepare students for employment after graduation?
Yeah, so just for the background, like everyone else has shared, our faculty grew frustrated with the previous platform that we had. So we moved to O'Reilly in 2019. So the point was that they made was that the previous platform is not going to get students to come back and to reskill and to develop and to think of Marine Park as being a place to come to. So there are the advisory committees of local businesses that we use to guide our curriculum also are a factor in that, telling us, you know, if you expect us to come back and send students back to Marine Park, we need a better platform. So that helped guide it, and that continues. And that was quite grateful that it happened, obviously, before the pandemic, so we had everything settled in place. We were ready to go. Luckily for us, it wasn't an extra financial burden for us because we just moved money around from one product to the next. But it was a good change after about a decade or so of a platform that really wasn't working very well for us. So it's good for our students after they graduate. You know, it gives a good impression of them. I hear from faculty that they're coming back, and that we do a lot of employee training, contracting with employers in the area. So it's good that, you know, it's a good reference for us too. So
I'm glad you said that. Actually, Noelle and I were talking. We talk quite a lot every week, and recently she stumbled across a quote from a librarian talking about using it as a resource for their own personal faculty and staff development, because there's material in there on presentation skills and all sorts of, you know, kind of personal and professional development kind of material that even librarian staff plug into and like to use. Speaking of librarians, what comments have you heard or conversations are you having with your librarian peers on the Great Resignation? Is this coming up a lot in your organic conversations with your peers? And, you know, how are they talking about providing students with support in this interesting climate we've got going on?
That's an interesting one. And it actually, I was having a conversation with our student success librarian the other day that arose from some of the questions that were proposed for this panel. And we were discussing what I was asking him about, what he hears about career preparedness from students. I know I hear some about that from faculty, but I haven't gotten any inquiries about that from students. And he said some, but not many. And so we are hoping to maybe do a little bit of an investigative study towards launching a pilot program, because we know the library has these resources. Students aren't coming to us, which tells me they don't know that. And so we're hoping to possibly pilot a program where the library works in conjunction with academic advisors and the career counseling office to share those available resources with students, and maybe do some workshops on those, and provide the students with more information about what the library can offer them to make their CV more marketable when they graduate and want to look for that first engineering job or something in IT. And hopefully we can help point them towards this resource as well as others. But for me, primarily O'Reilly, as you know, here are things that you can learn to sell yourself better.
Love it. Anything else from your librarian peers, from the other panelists, Adrian or Hans? Oh,
I would say what conversations we're having among ourselves, and also anecdotally with some faculty or students, is of course related to remote work. And a lot of remote work is more available than it used to be. And I think a lot of that is driving what we're seeing in this great resignation. And one of the things that we talk about is that we have the opportunity now because of the platform. It used to be we would have our faculty request us to keep maybe 1 or 2, 3 editions back with certain softwares or certain platform O'Reilly content that we had trouble finding shelf space for. Now, with this platform, which one of the things we like about it, we hope O'Reilly never changes, is that they tend to keep a couple older editions of things. And we're hearing from our faculty and our students, depending on where they're looking or where they land, they're looking at places they're going to have a little bit of a deeper understanding and more of a back file in terms of where the software that those corporations are using. So that's been something that we found really helpful. And I do think I'm seeing also just with the student workers I encounter, I don't want to say pickiness, but there's definitely some more choosiness that we're seeing in the jobs that they're considering. But in a way, I'm happy to be contributing to that and providing those resources to help them retool and to maybe negotiate a little bit more when they make those offers. So it's definitely been happening. We've seen even among some of our colleagues who have switched careers, or people who have switched careers and come in. So it is definitely something that we observe ourselves.
awesome. Thank you so much. Hans, jump in if there's something else you want to touch on that. But I hear what you're saying. I kind of think students are looking at not only careers differently, they're even looking at higher ed differently and looking at potential debt differently, you know, really thinking in very practical ways about the investment that they're putting into higher education and what they expect to get out of it. So it's really, there's so many factors that contribute to this volatility and these changes we're seeing in the job market and in education. Never gets old. So we want to talk a little bit, shifting kind of to the theme of preparing tech workers for the world. There are labor market stats that show a lot of resignations in the tech industry, and those have increased. And alongside that, there's a shortage of skilled workers to fill those roles. So tell us about the work your library is doing to ensure that students have those skills, the ones that they need to apply for these jobs and successfully, you know, land in somewhere other than the slush pile, right? Tell us about what your libraries are doing to prepare students to succeed when they apply for those roles.
Well, I know at ACC, there's a little bit of overlap with our career services centers. We have around 8 career services centers at the main campuses, and students can make an appointment with a career counselor to go over their resume and to get ideas about interview skills and jobs that are available. We even have an ACC specific job board where alumni from ACC can post jobs and students can search for jobs. But at the libraries, one of the things that we really focused on, and this is even pre-pandemic, especially being a community college, is we do want those skill sets, those practical skill sets, to be represented in our library holdings. So we actually have 4 specific career skill databases that the library funds, that the library promotes. And we work in tandem with suggestions from our career counselors as well when those come up. It's kind of like this nebulous overlap in terms of there's going to be some skills set databases that make more sense in a career setting in the career services office. But we have always traditionally collected materials about resume prep, about job interview skills. And so there was a natural need for us in some database holdings, but there's always more we can do.
Okay. Wonderful. Anything to add from our other panelists on that?
We also have a couple of career-related databases, resume tools, some career guidance type databases, and we have a career counseling services on campus. But I think the library has historically under-promoted those resources or have just been able to acquire them. And I don't think we have traditionally worked close enough with career counseling. And I suspect with the library's current mission, the university has a service-oriented mission in place right now to improve the student experience going through A&T. And I think in order to do that, the library will probably have to play a pretty critical role in connecting all of the various aspects of college to each other. So getting the students into the library to look at the resources that we have and cross references between career counseling and library services, because we have tools that the students can use. And I don't know if anyone's telling them about them. So
Yeah.
that's something we definitely need to work more on.
It's a really interesting point, and it resonates in a kind of strange way. There's an analog, a personal analog to that, which is, it wasn't until I was an undergraduate that I understood how disciplines connected, because in my high school time, right, I had a great high school experience, but here was the science hall, and here was the math hall, and here was the languages. And I didn't, until I was in humanities class as an undergraduate, understand that knowledge kind of interconnects. It seems like a strange notion, but similarly, you're talking about these services to support students. They connect, but maybe it's not clear if they're in different buildings and there's not some crosstalk between them, right? And we're not pointing to each other's resources. It's all connected, but a student's swimming in this vast ocean of college and may not have a clue unless, someone in the library, someone in the career services team is kind of making those connections for them. That's very cool. When you talk to faculty, what tech roles on the campus are they requesting learning information about or teaching support information about? What are they asking about the faculty?
Here it's been heavily on our application development, security, and a perennial one is the web design and development. But then those are the heaviest elements. The main focus of the last few years has also been, as libraries talk about, open educational resources, and in tandem with that, affordable educational resources. That's where we are getting in front of faculty and the associate deans to say, this is what we offer. This is an option for students. These are the things that are current. So it's mostly when they ask about these things, or when programs get renamed or they shift focus, then we can step in and help them find more tailored material for them.
Right.
We shift fairly quickly for a big institution. There's things that we have to do to make that happen, but we try to keep up with that.
Okay, excellent. What other tech roles have faculty asked about in terms of learning support and how your library might train students to head in those directions? Any other specific roles that have come up?
I think one of the newest ones for us is in July 2020, kind of in the depths of the pandemic, Tesla selected Austin for the site of their new Gigafactory.
Okay.
And so they have a new automotive manufacturing internship with Austin Community College.
Okay.
And so one of the things that we started looking at is what do we have for electronic car tech online database support? Then we're like, what can we do for that? What does that mean?
Yep.
So,
do we have that?
but one of the things that we looked in is that we had a lot of support for materials in that in O'Reilly and a couple other places that we had as well. So I think that's one that's really grabbed us recently. Of course, we also have internships and relationships with Meta/Facebook. So I didn't do all my eyes. Meta/Facebook. And also Apple as well. So a lot of coding, like my fellow panelists said. We also have, interestingly too, it's connected to tech. We have a lot of visual communication, visual design classes at ACC especially. And they also use a lot of the similar materials that we're finding with our computer information folks. A lot of the software titles are used by our visual communication because Austin is still a creative hub. So the way that those two things connect, we see a lot of coverage of that in O'Reilly as well.
That's a really good point. There is some good design information in there, not just user experience design or web design, but also, Photoshop, like a lot of tools to help designers in a lot of different parts of design. Yeah, really interesting. You guys have all dabbled in the benefits of having O'Reilly for higher education on your campus. I'm curious to know what you know or what you've seen when you've seen it. How do students interact with it? What have students benefited from specifically? I know it being a digital resource, you're not necessarily sitting over their shoulder, kind of observing it directly. Obviously they're dialing in from home, they're in their dorm room, maybe using it who knows where and who knows when. But have you come across any parts of like the curriculum that have required it, or have you observed students using it that, any examples like that?
I have not seen them using it, but I'll be very interested. Like I said, we really just acquired the product, but I've been telling my faculty about it. But I'll be really interested to see the analytics about what the students are looking at, how much time they're spending in there.
Yeah.
And I suspect a lot of the information science content is going to be very popular. We talk, the engineering professors that I talk to on campus talk a lot about machine learning, particularly in other departments, biological sciences. They're doing a lot of research using machine learning, and they are trying to teach the students machine learning processes using things like R and Python, and have not historically gotten much support for that. So I'm going to be interested to see if faculty start referring students into this for things like data architecture and data science and machine learning.
Yeah, one of the other big aha moments for me working with O'Reilly was how much the Polar Bear book, as it's referred to, which is their book on information architecture, how much that resonated with our librarians, because a lot of them had to read it during library school. It's the big, with the woodcut polar bear on the front. So for sure, information architecture plays into it too, for sure. That's helpful. So the other thing that you had mentioned, Adrian, just I wanted to jump on was the idea of space, how in the past, and I've definitely heard this having talked to librarians a lot over the past couple of decades or more, especially in business and technology, these two main subject areas that O'Reilly serves, space has always been an issue for the libraries, especially when things were very physical and brick and mortar, and they had a collection that was maxing out. So space and also currency. So that's something that I hear for sure that O'Reilly addresses for our librarians. Takes care of both those things in one go, being a digital product and being curated and constantly updated. So I just want to kind of resonate on that for a minute, or like hover on that one for a minute. Let's shift gears to like the future. Thinking about those maybe not as far down as those elementary students, but sort of this reset that we're headed into or in already, this reshuffle. It is predicted that advancements in technology could actually lead to workers who aren't fully prepared for work by the time that they graduate. So how can O'Reilly, given what it includes, what it has right within the database, how can it help prepare your students with a stronger foundation before graduations to kind of set them up for success?
Well, I wanted to mention one of the things, I just ran my stats in preparation for the panel. When we brought O'Reilly on, we're now averaging around 13,000 units accessed a month. So it's pretty heavily used.
Awesome.
I suspected that would be the case, but I was really gratified to see that. And one of the areas that we see a lot of activity, and that surprised me because I didn't really originally think about it so much when we brought on the subscription, but we see a lot of activity with business ethics and philosophy. And a lot of that is being driven by faculty assignments, because our faculty are emphasizing, as students prepare with those tech skills, and again, sorry Zuckerberg with the eye roll, but morals, business ethics, those are the sorts of things that we are seeing our students being asked to read about, especially as they go forth into this newish digital online technical world.
Yeah.
So that one was really interesting to me, to see how that was something, I think it's in our top 3 of our subject areas access.
Wow. Yeah.
And I know anecdotally from speaking to faculty, that is something they are trying to emphasize in the college environment before the students head out into the business world.
So David and Adrian have both referenced this space within O'Reilly, so I'll just gloss it really quickly. You've talked in a way about the insights dashboard, which is part of the administrative tool, which really does provide very robust and dynamic and flexible views into what's going on in the database. Given that we're all far flung and remote, it really is a good glimpse into what your campus is focused on. What are the top 5 subjects in a given discipline that they're looking at? Okay, they're looking at software, what kinds, and it's kind of amazing once you start digging into that insights dashboard, what you can learn about your own community right on the go. And it is dynamic, so it changes, constantly, and this material is downloadable into CSV format. I kind of marvel at what's there and probably the technology that went into building it. It's a really nice dashboard if people haven't had a look at it. So I'm glad you brought that up. I hadn't intended to go there, but I think it's helpful to know how you're using the tool, not only to serve your students and faculty, but to better understand their needs and where they're concentrating, what their focus is on. That's cool. Glad to hear that. Anything else on this?
I'll probably have to have our e-resources librarian send me that information, because I don't have access to the dashboard.
Yeah, the admin, it's kind of the admin role, but worth a look for sure. I'm curious to know, we've talked about O'Reilly a lot. We've talked about your experiences with O'Reilly, and I love doing that. But taking it out of the world of O'Reilly for a minute, as you think about this volatility in the market, and we've talked about the challenges and kind of uncertainty around it and how we're doing our best to prepare students, but what kind of opportunities might this present to students, this volatility?
I think in particular in the tech industry, my brother's worked in the tech industry for a very long time, and there are a lot of companies that seem to exist in the tech space that spend lavishly on extraordinary office spaces with free food for employees and physical fitness centers on campus and physicians on campus, and all of these seemingly extraordinary perks. People in the workforce are beginning to realize that those are just candy coating on worker exploitation. And I think this great resignation we're seeing is because so many people are like, man, I'm really being exploited by my employer and I'm tired of it. And they're not going to stand for it anymore. And I think what that's going to lead to, at least what I hope it's going to lead to, we have a STEM early college on campus. Okay. So we have high school students that are on our campus. And I have a 9-year-old daughter. And so what I'm hoping that leads to is an economic environment that prioritizes that sort of work-life balance over the unsustainable promise that we've seen of endlessly increasing productivity. That's just not going to work in this climate. People are not going to take those jobs, and things are going to have to change. So I'm fortunate enough to work in higher education where the work-life balance is quite nice, but I hope very much that by the time my daughter has graduated from college, there will be a surfeit of opportunities to work at companies who value that balance as much as my university does.
Nice. I like that vision.
The
opportunity. Go ahead. Sorry, Hans.
No problem. Just to piggyback on what David said, I think that ties in with, aside from those perks, but also how are the employers developing their employees? And do you have a reputation of developing your employees and giving them resources to learn more on the job? That's something we focus on too, just as a college internally. How are we going to develop our staff to take these positions as people retire? And as new skills are needed for our work. So that's trickled, obviously we've seen that throughout our communities that we serve too, that the employers are looking for that too. It's not just the donuts or what have you, or the vacation time. It's also what can we give, for them to get better. Yeah. And without the fear of them, necessarily moving on, but sticking with the company that gives them those opportunities to learn.
Awesome. Anything to add there, Adrienne, of the opportunities that this volatility presents?
I'm seeing a little bit more risk taking, which I like. I think, and our students, a lot of them are already kind of taking a risk by going to college. They're first-time college students. A lot of them are taking a risk by saying, where I'm at, it's not working out for me, so I'm going to come back and get a certificate or retrain. But I feel that that's even being accelerated a little bit more. And I do think, like my fellow panelists said, that I see students thinking more critically about the mission of the corporations that they look at joining. And I think holistically, the questions of what really matters and what are we honestly doing every day with this corporation. So all of those things are good things. I think that has changed a little bit more over the past 3 or 4 years, and those are good things to see.
Nice. Like to focus on that, because it's all about, there's this uncertainty, there's this volatility, all this unprecedentedness, and what does it mean? It does present some opportunities and some new ways of looking at work that weren't a part of my generation, for sure. So I'm kind of excited. And on a personal level, David, raising kids too. I've got twin boys who will go into college with any luck. In 3 years, they're going to be sophomores. So it's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds. Yeah, absolutely. I want to give us enough time to take some questions if there are some in the chat, Noelle. And I have another question kind of up my sleeve for the panel, but I don't want to do that at the expense of engaging with the chat. I'm notorious about unitasking. So have we got any questions for our crew here in the chat?
We do have one question.
Awesome.
Do you have cost per use data you'd be willing to share? That's from Diane Vanderpool.
Cost per use for O'Reilly specifically?
Yes, for O'Reilly.
Okay. And that could be a private question. So I just want to say, one of the things we're going to do before we wrap up here today is share our contact information with this group of attendees. So if that's something you're more comfortable answering over email, that's fine. And for the person who asked the question, whose name I've already forgotten, what was it, Noelle?
Diane Vanderpool.
Thank you. So Diane, if you do want to just fire off a question privately, just in case people don't have that right at their fingertips, our emails will show up in just a moment here in the slides. But does anybody have anything to share on cost per usage in general, since the topic's been raised? I don't want to snuff it out.
I will say that I don't have them right at the ready, but I do usually have these numbers. So I would be happy to share. I will say in all transparency, I don't have counter, because I don't think O'Reilly is counter compliant.
No,
But
it's not. We can provide counter-like usage. We call them counter-like with air quotes usage stats at request. ProQuest does this to help serve our community. But yeah, no, not counter stats, counter 5 stats. Yep.
I'm happy to provide CPU based on the metrics that I do have available through the dashboard.
Perfect. Awesome. Any other things in the chat there, Noelle, or was that it?
We do have one other question. This may throw you all for a loop, okay?
Oh, good. Okay, we like that.
Okay, this is from Danielle Masurski, and she asked, are there any thoughts on non-tech jobs like teachers, nurses, social workers? So many leaving high demand fields.
Good question.
Well, I'll speak to that anecdotally. My sister is a nurse through the entire COVID pandemic. And of course, ACC has an extensive nursing program. I would wager to say we're one of the best in Central Texas, even better than so many of the 4 years, because we do a very good internship program. So our nursing students get hands-on wonderful skills before they graduate. And now, of course, we have a BSN. I've seen a lot of nurses fatigued and quitting and going into, I've encountered them on the reference desk, that they love their profession, but it was a grueling past 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
So we are seeing some retooling, at least at my institution, specifically speaking to the nurses, for sure.
I would just chime in. We have a nursing program, early childhood education, and somewhat related. We don't have a social work program, but a corrections, a criminal justice program. So all those fields have seen great turnover, more so than others, I'd say. And likewise, we've seen decreased demand for those programs. We used to have a waiting list for our nursing programs. And now anyone who makes the cut with the entrance exams, they're pretty much in.
Wow.
So we're not worried just yet, but it's been a real change for faculty and associate deans to think about, well, here's our program, here's where it stands. It's quite different. So I don't see that changing much with like they had mentioned, like Adrian mentioned, the stress that's out there for those workers.
Yeah, and I have a bit of a personal connection there too. My wife was a 7th grade teacher until this year, and she left the classroom to go work in the private sector for a more mission-centered company. And something like 20% of her colleagues in the school she was in left. And of them, I think somewhere around half are just leaving teaching. I don't know where they're going, but a lot of people are fleeing from the teaching profession. And that's an area that's going to be really difficult, because a lot of them are, I think a lot of people are leaving teaching because of the conditions under which they have to work. And that's not something that can pivot in the way a private sector company can, when education is essentially run by the state. And until the state starts to recognize the limitations that are being put on teachers, I think they're going to continue to leave the program. And I don't liaise with our teacher education program or our nursing program, but I'd be interested to know if they've had changes in enrollment, or do they have still lots of starry-eyed people who are going to go in there and change the profession for the better?
Yeah, good points.
I'd like to add a little bit to that question as well. That's why I turned my camera on so you all can see me. Good. But one thing that I noticed as far as, people transitioning from one field to another is my last position was in health tech. And there were a plethora of nurses who actually worked for this company because they bought their expertise from the hospital into a whole totally different industry that they weren't working in before. So I think that goes back to the importance of making sure students have exposure to tech opportunities, because you never know how they can use their skill sets where they've gained elsewhere and bring it into the tech industry.
Right. We've said a number of times during these conversations that I've had since I've been working with O'Reilly over the past couple of years, that all businesses run on technology, and it's not just businesses. I mean, to some degree, the need to know about technology, regardless of what you're doing, it's clear. It becomes clearer every day. So I feel like that it's interesting, because in my career, I've worked on books on modern dance. I've worked on a Shakespeare database. I've represented literature resources, which was, what my training was in originally. But it's really interesting to work with something that's utterly practical and completely kind of critical to people's success. Like it's not a nice to have sort of resource for a lot of students. It's a very much a need to have. So I like working on all kinds of resources, but this has been really rewarding to watch people talk about how this is actually making a difference for students today and responding to needs they have in the moment, given our volatile employment market. Is there anything else? I guess unless you're seeing something in the chat, I'm going to ask the big, kind of closing question of our panelists. Is there anything else O'Reilly and companies like O'Reilly and ProQuest can be doing to help you prepare students for the future? Any thoughts on that? What else can we be doing? I'm always looking to iterate. And it's okay if you want to think about it.
Yeah. Well, I know our students like the support files that come on O'Reilly to actually have the hands-on work. That's key. And of course, I think this is happening, but making sure things are accessible. That's a huge focus at our college. So. Okay,
great point. That's a really great point. And accessibility. Thank you for bringing that up.
And I haven't seen any issue with this, but working where I do at an HBCU, DEI initiatives are so important to so that students using a resource, when they feel represented and seen, I think they're more likely to make best use of it. And so diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility are of critical importance to serving the student body, because if that's not there, they won't use it. And it's only worth anything to them if they use it.
Absolutely. I love that. Anything to add there, Adrienne? Don't feel like you have to. You've all shared so much.
I would agree to both of those points. I would also add for the students that we are seeing, again, the tech skills are critically important. Keep older editions, don't purge them immediately from the database. That really works well for us. And I think one of the things that are important too is that even at a library level too, we are still finding most of our O'Reilly resources through a discovery layer in our catalog. So making sure those are easily foundable and the metadata stacked, because if something's findable, then it's going to be used more often. So that's really important to us too.
And that was a point I wanted to share earlier when you were talking about usage. There's nothing better, nothing that makes my ears happier than hearing you say that you're getting usage, because we're in this for a reason. And if people aren't getting usage, it sort of takes a lot of the meaning out of it for people who work to make these resources available. So there's nothing better to hear than that usage is good, because you're spending your days and your hours creating something that's helpful. So great to hear that. So wonderful note to kind of end on. I will say it's interesting. Earlier, I'm almost ending. Earlier in the week, someone talked about, hey, what does DEI look like for O'Reilly? And I happen to have created a playlist called DEI, and kind of digging around in the database, exploring, found quite a few resources, but also shared with my O'Reilly partners, hey, you know, our librarians are really interested in hearing and in seeing this, maybe in the subject thesaurus. So I passed that feedback along to them just earlier this week, so that students who are looking for DEI resources specifically by that label will find it as well as a subject category, not just hunting and pecking, but there is some good stuff in there. And I was happy that I happened to have a playlist about it. So we'll take those on board. I really appreciate the constructive feedback and the ideas and how we can further help students, and all your time and energy today. I just want to say thank you, and thank you again to Noelle for all the heavy lifting. And I think we're going to have our partner from ACRL, Choice, jump on. Yeah. Hi, Sabrina.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much to Adrian, Hans, and David for taking the time to speak with us today. And thank you to Peg and Noelle for moderating the discussion and the Q&A. And thank you to our attendees for your questions and comments. I'd like to remind our viewers that we did record today's program, so be on the lookout for a follow-up email from Choice and ACRL with a link to the recording. Also, if you have a few minutes after the presentation to fill out a brief survey, we'd really appreciate it. Your responses help our presentations. So thanks again to all of you out there for joining us. We hope you learned something new from the session, and we hope to see you again in the near future on another webinar.
Thanks, everyone.
You're welcome.